Well, greetings, viewers and listeners to CHP Talks. We're here with a very special guest that you all will recognize, Mr. Brian Peckford, and I'm going to give him a little introduction in a second. But Brian, thank you once again for joining us on CHP Talks.
Well, thank you very much for having me back again. And thank you for coming to Parksville and visiting me. And you and your wife and my wife and I really enjoyed sitting down with you and getting to know you better. And I think it's one of the reasons why both that previous interview and meeting you personally, that when your request came in, of which there are many, yours was put to the top of the list because we so appreciated meeting you and do appreciate what you're about and what you are doing.
Well, it's a very special. We feel very privileged to have personal contact with you. So for those who don't know, the Honourable A. Brian Peckford, PC, is our guest today. Brian was born in Whitburn, Newfoundland in March 1972 at the age of 29. Brian was elected the first Progressive Conservative MHA, which is member of the House of Assembly of Newfoundland. He served as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Minister of Mines and Energy, and also Minister of Rural Development and Northern Affairs. In March 1979, Brian won the Progressive Conservative leadership and became the third Premier of the province since Confederation. He was at 36 the youngest First Minister of Newfoundland since the first Prime Minister, Philip Little, in 1855. Brian, at that time, became a strong advocate of provincial rights, as manifested in his efforts. Some of you are old enough to remember his efforts to gain control of and revenues for the province from the developing offshore oil and gas resources, which culminated in the Atlantic Accord. Brian was also involved in the constitutional patriation process of the early 1980s, leading to the Constitution Act of 1982 and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is part of our discussion today. It was Newfoundland's proposal that led to the breakthrough. Brian is the only living First Minister of that constitutional process. Mr. Peckford retired from politics in March 1989 and began a consulting company with his wife, Carol. He's written two books. The last is Someday the Sun Will Shine and Have Not Will Be No More. And that was a Globe and Mail bestseller in 2012. He was sworn to the Privy Council by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth in 1982, and he has conducted inquiries on behalf of the British Columbia government and the government of Canada. And we're going to talk about another inquiry that needs to be done in this country that Brian has brought to our attention. And he retired for a second time in 2001, presently lives in Parksville, British Columbia. And now we're so grateful he's come out of retirement once again to fight for the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. So, Brian, again, pleasure and privilege to have you with us today, and we look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, sir, very much, and thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you have become one of the visible leaders of the freedom movement in this country, and calling consistently and patiently and passionately for a restoration of the rights and freedoms that I mean, the rights and freedoms can't be taken away, but they can be violated. And the ones that are listed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I'm going to be talking, we are going to be discussing this Magna Carta for Canada that you have put together on the steps of the Victoria Legislature on May 28th. You presented very well this statement, and for those who want to look at it later, you can visit Brian's blog at Peckford42 wordpress.com, and if you go back to May 29, you'll find the text of this Magna Carta, and if you go on May 30, you can watch it being delivered on YouTube. But I want to start with, actually, I'm going to page 3 or the bottom of this, your conclusion. And I just want to read this for the folks. And you say that unless we take matters in our own hands as citizens and move forward with new paradigms new structures, facing up to the brutal reality of our failed existing system, we will be captured by corrupt mainstream political parties, a broken health care system where over 5 million Canadians are without a regular physician, an education system that promotes failed economic and political ideas, that denigrates our traditions and historical figures that helped create this nation, a press system that through coercion and money has become an arm of big government, an economic system that depends on government and where real free enterprise is stifled and fair free trade is on its deathbed, a system that sees our society being run by the four horsemen, big government, big press, big pharma, and big tech, an Orwellian construct that with the dominance of a world order wants the nation state reduced, the individual becomes subject to dictates of an international unelected bureaucrat or bureaucracy. This is our fate without a new Magna Carta for Canada. So very well put, Brian. That ties it all up. So now we're going to go back and say, what is this Magna Carta that you have presented? Of course, the original Magna Carta 1215 was when the nobles got together and demanded that bad King John recognize the rights of others and that he put his own rights under the rule of law. So this Magna Carta for Canada, the first thing you call for is an independent public national inquiry to examine whether government, federal, provincial, and territorial, whether the mandates and lockdowns were necessary and constitutional. So let's hear you explain how that would happen and what needs to happen to bring it to pass.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, the latter part of the Magna Carta that you read, I spent, as you can tell, I spent some time on because the original document didn't have that last part in, and I knew I had to bring it all together at the end, as you just read it. And I'm glad I did, because I think it does, summarize everything that came before. Now, one of the first things that came to my attention as this pandemic unraveled, if you will, and our freedoms and rights were taken away from us was, how are we going to reestablish our nation in an honest and forthright way? And I thought that the first thing we had to do was to clean up what's happened in the last 2 years, what was necessary medically and scientifically to do, the governments had to do to combat their alleged pandemic, as they declared, which definition changed over time, as we know from the World Health Organization. That's one of our problems, is that the goalposts keep changing. And so I thought that one of the first things needed to be done, given that there were mandates in all 10 provinces, in the federal government, and in the 3 territories, that we would have to do a national inquiry. And a lot of people, when I start talking about that, and people that I spoke to were on the wagon of a federal inquiry. And I kept going back to them and saying, well, you've got to understand that you don't understand the Constitution if you say a federal inquiry, because the Constitution talks about there being, 10 governments and the federal government, and not one federal government. Powers are shared from the federal government to the provinces. And all of the provinces had mandates, including the territories and the federal government. So if you just did a federal mandate, you would only be looking at those measures that the federal government brought in, ignoring anything that British Columbia did or Newfoundland did or Saskatchewan did or whatever. So if we really want to get at, and I know this from personal experience, because within my own friendships and family, I know of mandates provincially which affected my friends' people and some of the people in my extended family. So I'm quite familiar with all of this, and I'm even more familiar with it today because a teacher here in Parksville asked my wife and I if I would speak at their school and explain the Charter of Rights and Freedom, which I was delighted to get, only to have it canceled by the principal 48 hours before I was to attend that speech, to give that speech at the school. So that was quite local, right here in my own community that you visited with to see me and talk to me several weeks ago. And so one needs to do a national inquiry. Now, the issue will come down to now that I've called for it and a lot of people are supporting it, how do we make it happen?
Right.
And this will be a great challenge because, as you and I both know, as the mandates came off, people go back and get relaxed and think, oh, well, everything is over, everything is fine. Meanwhile, people have died because they didn't get their surgery on time. The surgeries got canceled. People died because their specialist appointment got canceled. And we know of people. We know of people directly that this happened to. So this is not some theoretical concept. This is real on the ground stuff. And so I'm having a meeting later this week with some of the organizers of the event in Victoria, in which we're going to pursue this further now. And we've got to try to get all of the freedom organizations on side, right? From the Canadian COVID Care Alliance to the Vaccine Choice Canada, to Taking Back Our Freedoms, to the We Unify group in Victoria who helped organize this event in Victoria, to all of the other Action for Canada, all of the organizations that are out there fighting on behalf of the citizens for the Charter and supporting the Charter. We need them all on side and somehow organize a committee out of all of these groups to start to organize a national inquiry led by citizens, and then contact all of these experts. For example, in Taking Back Our Freedoms, which I chair, as I'm chairman of the board, they already have on a board of advisors a whole bunch of very expert people on the medical side. Dr. Paul Alexander, right? Dr. Brian Bridle, right? Dr. Eric Payne out of Alberta, Dr. Roger Hodgkinson out of Alberta, right? Groups of people and others who are in the business of doing research on infectious diseases that can act as expert witnesses because they have done a lot of research both on this, both in Canada and around the world. And then to get other people, lawyers, there's quite a few lawyers now around who are fighting, taking on the cases, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, who's taking on my case, for example, and other lawyers that I've come to know. So we can put together a battery, if you will, of experts, both on the law and on the Constitution and on the medical side to help us, right, as we form an inquiry. So it's in its early stages. One of the stumbling blocks, I think, that are still there is that as some groups, once you talk about things, everybody's on side. Mm-hmm. Once you start to put tangible things in place, in other words, talking to talk is easy, walking the walk becomes more difficult. When you actually say, here's what we have to do, here's what we said, now here's what we got to do, there is in Canada a general sort of reluctance to take it that next step. Right. And I think that's something, that's a challenge that we're going to have going forward, is to make sure because the last thing we want is a division within our freedom groups. They all must be on side, like the truckers' convoy. They all must be on side in order for us to be effective and have credibility. I think we'll have credibility from an expertise point of view because we know who these people are and they're very supportive and they're really willing to help and do whatever is necessary, both on the law and on the medicine and research side. Now we need to get all of the freedom groups to be part of this, put their names forward, and we'll get a group of people who are younger than me and more organized than I am and who are national all across the country to agree to help put this together. And then we can start to formulate who's on it, who's going to hear all of these experts and so on. So that's where we are right now as it relates to what I think is necessary to clean up what happened in the last 2 years so that we have credibility going forward for a new path.
Yeah. One challenge I see with that, of course, is the getting the recognition that this is a legitimate inquiry, getting the federal and provincial governments, territorial governments to even recognize it, and of course getting the mainstream media, the bought and paid for mainstream media, to cover it in an honest way. So have you got any thoughts how that's going to play out?
Well, I think one of the first things, one of the first strategies coming out of creating this inquiry will be to do briefing times, right, with the mainstream media. Invite them to a briefing session before we even start to have the hearings for the inquiry. Have briefing section, and because of the technology today, like we're using, we can do that, right, quite easily, to get them to attend briefing sessions where both on the legal side and on the research side, the press can see that we have not only national, but international people who are willing to participate in this. For example, who's already participated in my lawsuit? Peter McCullough, one of the most research, or one of the persons who put out more documents that have never been challenged and never been found to be invalid, right, than any other researcher in the whole world.
Right.
And he's appeared on behalf of my lawsuit here in Canada. And I've been on Zooms with him and many, many other of his friends who were involved in the field, both in the United States and in Europe, by the way, and in the United Kingdom. Talk to people in the United Kingdom. The World Council for Health, for example, that new council. There are people in that who will testify. So that's one way we can gain credibility, is if we invite the press and anybody else for that matter along to various briefing sessions, which will demonstrate that we are credible.
Very, very good. Well, you're certainly credible with me. So this document that you've put together has so many facets that we're not going to be able to cover them all, obviously, but I'm going to pick out a couple that I would like to have you expand on for the people. It says for the Supreme Court, currently, we know that the Supreme Court nominees basically are put forward by the Prime Minister, and we're kind of end up with what we get. So you're calling for those nominated candidates for the Supreme Court to be subject to a hearing by a parliamentary committee, and then have their names and recommendations presented to the full Parliament, so that Parliament would be deciding that, not the Prime Minister. One of the reasons, I just listened to a thing by Ezra Levant, and he pointed out that the current Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, has made some pretty derogatory comments about the truckers' convoy, calling them basically anarchists, insurrectionists, and so on. And he hasn't even heard the cases yet. I mean, these are cases proceeding through the lower courts. So that's kind of a far cry from judicial, independence. So anyway, maybe you can speak about that a little bit.
Yeah. I'm glad you raised that as one of the key points, Rod, because this is an unbelievably disturbing what is happening. Just 2 or 3 days ago, I read a news report that the chief elections officer is looking at getting more changes to the Elections Act to prohibit what he determines to be misinformation. Well, we already know what they have determined to be misinformation. The Prime Minister is already leading the charge, calling you and me and others racists and misogynists because we're not vaccinated for this particular vaccination. And now we find the Chief Justice of Canada, the top judge in our country, speaking disparagingly of something which is presently before the courts in Ontario, the truckers' convoy leader and others, and where up to now, most of the criticisms that were leveled at the truckers' convoy have proven to be false. Mm-hmm. With the dark money that was supposed to exist, Fentech, who's the organization that tracks money coming in and out of the country have testified to a parliamentary committee. There was no dark money in the truckers' convoy. It was all citizens of Canada contributing a mooloony or a toonie or a $20 bill and so on. It was clean. It was clean. And many other allegations that have been made against these truckers have proven to be wrong and have been proven, that the facts don't justify what they said. For example, the other one was that the police were agitating to the federal government to bringing in the Emergencies Act. Well, the RCMP has testified that they didn't. The RCMP has testified. The city police have testified that they didn't recommend the Emergencies Act being brought in. These are statements that completely undermine the charges that have come against the truckers' convoy from both the Prime Minister and others in the federal government and around Canada. And of course, the mainstream press has not been carrying that to the extent that they should be carrying it, because this demonstrates that this whole notion of the truckers' convoy being somehow led by a terrorist group or some other thing. As a matter of fact, it was the truckers' convoy people in Ottawa who reported on the infiltration of people from outside. And it was then the city police of Ottawa who arrested them on being known about it because of the truckers. And that city police people the next day erroneously reported that there were people infiltrating the truckers' convoy when it was the truckers' convoy themselves that reported the criminality that was going on. So, I mean, so it's amazing. So to get back to your point, and I think the time has come in Canada. We have to recognize certain realities that the present judicial appointment system does not work. Exhibit A, you just gave it. The top judge in Canada prejudging a group before he even hears it, before there's even an appeal before his court to hear it. These are supposed to be independent people who are that we're supposed to trust and look up to. And the Prime Minister himself calling you and me and others racist and misogynist, and perhaps we're taking up space that we shouldn't be taking up space in Canada. By the way, I've got that in my lawsuit. Those words are in my lawsuit or in my affidavit, I want you to know. So it seems to me that part of that cleansing of our system and bringing in this Magna Carta type thing that I have recommended, one of the chief recommendations is that it's the people as represented by their parliament that are supposed to be supreme in a democracy. Well, how can a democracy exist if the parliament and the representatives of the people have no say about who's going to adjudicate their laws? And of course,
very well.
It seems pretty basic. You can go back to Montesquieu, you can go back to Socrates, you can go back to Cicero, you can go back to even John Stuart Mill, the more liberal political philosopher. But you can go into Jefferson and Madison of the Federalist Papers in the United States. And all through history, Voltaire is another great example. People who have spent their life studying this political governance and coming to the conclusion that the people, in order to have a pure democracy, a good democracy, needs to have say over all the things that are going to govern them. And so I think the time has come for, number one, there to be a special law which defines what are the qualifications for a judge even being considered, a lawyer being considered a judge, number one. Right now, it's in regulations under the Justice Act. Not good enough anymore, I submit. We need to have just one law which says qualifications of judges in Canada, right? Especially Superior Court judges, Supreme Court of the provinces and the Superior Court of the federal government, including the Federal Court and the Supreme Court of Canada, okay? So have an act of parliament. It's quite easy to do. As we know, you can submit this anytime, any member can, or any party can. And so have a definition of what the criteria for somebody to qualify to be a judge is, number one. And number two, when they are nominated, then by the government of the day to serve on a court of any of these courts, that it be immediately referred to the Justice Committee of the Parliament of Canada, who will hold hearings, question these people in public, question these people as to their bona fides and as to their viewpoints on various pressing issues that we all know will come before the court if they are nominated. And then after that hearing is over, that the committee takes a vote and says, we recommend to the full Parliament the A, B, and C, or we reject these nominations for the following reasons, or we approve these nominations for the following reasons. Then Parliament has a vote, and then whatever Parliament decides, that's who becomes the members of our judiciary.
Very good, very good. Great explanation and great reasoning, and certainly an important aspect. Two things I want to hit. We're going to run out of time, but I was very pleased to see you calling for all governments of Canada to have balanced budget legislation enacted with no exceptions except in times of pending war or insurrection where the country's existence is at stake. And I just want you to know that the Christian Heritage Party of Canada already has that in our party platform. And so I was very glad to see it as a demand, because our economy, our national economy, and our ability of people to feed their kids and have a roof over their heads is being threatened by the rash and reckless spending of this government, not only this government, but others before it, and certainly provincial governments as well. So kudos to you for including that in this Magna Carta.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I did read your platform after I met you first, and I realized that you've been onto this for a long time, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, like as we see today, why is inflation now raising its ugly head? Is because we've spent so beyond our capacity, right? Is just amazing. And unless we manage, and we got to manage our governments the same way as we manage our own household, right? We've got to spend what we brought in, not spend and have to go borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And so we get at a position where, suddenly the markets of the world say, okay, you've just sort of gone beyond. Look at Ontario. If Ontario became a state tomorrow, they'd be bankrupt, same way as California would, primarily because they've been unbelievably irresponsible in borrowing money that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to have to pay off. This is reckless and irresponsible. And we must become responsible custodians of the people's money.
Yeah, excellent. And of course, one that I know that you will know how much we appreciate is the number K, or the section labeled K here says, Canadian courts hearing a constitutional case related to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms must be obligated to consider in their written rulings the two introductory concepts to the Charter, which are the supremacy of God and the rule of law. No decision rendered without a written consideration in the decision of these principles will be valid. So we very much appreciate that as well. And we appreciate that the supremacy of God and the rule of law were part of the original, in the preamble to the Charter. And thank you for including this as well.
Well, I'll tell you, you and a number of other Christian organizations in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and some in Vancouver Island, were influential in my thought process on this. I was advocating for some time about these two principles that were there. I remember when we put them in there, that was totally, obviously, quite deliberate on our part. I don't know if they get back in there today. That's why they're so important now. That's why they're so important. But I have to say that you and others have been influential in me highlighting and prioritizing these concepts. Because as I got into this more and more and thought about it, and went back to what we did in 1981 and 82 to put those in, it became more abundantly clear to me of just how important this is to the regulation of a human society, if I can put it in those more secular terms. But in order for human society to exist, and by the way, Charles Lugosi, who was a constitutional lawyer who I attracted to speak at the conference a couple of weeks ago, did a great thing that I put on my blog as well, explaining the fundamentals of the Judeo-Christian heritage of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Fantastic piece of work that this man did, which completely supports what you and I are saying about those two principles in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And without a moral code, which obviously comes from religion, in our case, the Judeo-Christian, which has been the most successful bulwark, been the most successful foundation for any living human society ever in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, therefore, what we are talking about is promoting principles which are necessary, we have proven through all of history, are necessary for the functioning of a reasonable, sensible, fair society, right? That without having those God-given rights, not man-given rights, and it's the rule of law, not by the rule by law, as Charles Lugosi said, right? It's of law, of coming from natural, inalienable, right? That is so important. And now when you look around the world, I mean, as Mr. Lugosi said in his presentation, you cannot find, anywhere where a society has become a very strong democrat. And the founders in the United States recognize that, right? The inalienable rights right in their Constitution. They realize that. And Madison and Jefferson and others of those, they pondered long and hard over this. And it's still recognized, the federal papers are still recognized in the United States or in the world as some of the most important documents ever written on political science and the formation of a society. So I'm becoming more and more, as you can tell, I'm becoming more and more, what shall I say, convinced of how important it was at the time that we put those two concepts in there. And I put it into this document because two lower court rulings have ignored the very thing that they're supposed to consider when they're considering cases dealing with the Charter, and have ignored the supremacy of God. One mentions the rule of law, but never uses it in the final decision that's made in that case, and another ignores it completely. These are judges who are obligated, right? We thought to consider that all of the Charter must be considered in the light of those two principles. So it's now necessary, because of the last 2 years in particular, where judges are ignoring the principles by which they're supposed to render their decision, it's necessary for us as a society to put into law that this court, all of our courts, are no longer valid when they're considering a charter case unless they, in writing, demonstrate that they have considered these two principles.
Great. Well, tremendous. I'm so grateful for you including that. We've pretty well used up, I'm sorry, the time that you had available, but I wonder if you could quickly say anything about your court case, your lawsuit that you're bringing, just explain that to the folks, and then afterward let people know how we might help.
Yes, thank you very much, and we'll go on beyond our time frame, and I'm pleased to do so. I've got 2 more Zoom meetings today, but this is really important, and I appreciate you contacting me and me getting this opportunity. I have a briefing session tonight. One of my 3 things I'm doing today, your thing, another thing relating to national inquiry, and the third thing tonight is a meeting online with my lawyers to get a full briefing on where we are. But they have communicated some of the information to me, and so we're still in where it's, well, number one, I have taken out a lawsuit with other Canadians as part of it, challenging the federal government on their travel mandate. We're saying that their travel mandate is unconstitutional. There's no place in the world right now, even communist countries or authoritarian countries or wherever, where citizens cannot travel around their own country by train or by plane. No other country, only Canada. That's how bad, how out of step we are on the planet today. And so this was launched in late January, early February, and we now have we are now in court. The federal government had appointed its lawyers, right? We had appointed our lawyers, and then we identified our expert witnesses, and I mentioned Peter McCullough. Dr. Brian Bridle is another one who's part of our research expertise team on the medical side. And then they had to do the same thing, identify their expert witnesses and their lawyers. And now we're at a point where both parties are questioning the evidence of the other's expert witnesses, okay? Ours are all finished on our side and they've been questioned. And now we are busy questioning and cross-examining the expert witnesses that the federal government's put up. Interestingly enough, and I'm sure you will not be surprised, that when this court case started, there was, federal government indicated they would have like 4 or 5 lawyers. I think it's now up to 11. Mm. And they were going to have 5 or 6 expert witnesses. It's now up to 16. So by them coming back into court and having to amend how many lawyers they were going to have, amending how many expert witnesses they were going to have, of course, that extended the time of the case. So we have had to add on several days in order to accommodate that, and the judges allowed that to happen. So I think it's fair to say to your audience this morning that the federal government has started to take this case a little more seriously in recent times than they did when it was first launched.
Right.
Given the number of lawyers they've added, given the number of expert witnesses they've added. So it should all be finished. All of that part of the case should be finished by the end of July, first week in August, okay? And the judge has already identified September 19th, all that week, those 5 days, to be the public part of the court case. So people, if they're interested in this lawsuit, mark down September 19th and go online to the Federal Court of Canada. The Federal Court of Canada, and you should be able to pick that up live on stream. It should be streamed. So you will be able to see that case for the 5 days starting September the 19th. If people want to help, it's getting, as you can imagine, more and more expensive all the time. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, www.jccf.com, I think, or .ca, one or the other, will bring up the Justice Center. And they have 3 or 4 lawyers who are working on this full time, and an outside lawyer who they've hired, who is the lead lawyer, Mr. Keith Wilson. They're the ones who are in court every day now arguing this case. There are 5 other Canadians named on this case, and Mr. Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, he's also launched a suit through the JCCF, and that's been combined with my case. So it's all going to be heard together. So all those travel mandate cases are coming together so that we'll have this big hearing in September. When that's finished at the end of 24th, 25th of September, the judge then goes away and then renders a decision, which we hope that judge will give before Christmas.
Yeah, very good.
So
Very
that's
good.
the lineup. And you can donate through the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Go in there and there's a place to donate to help pay the cost. Now, the Justice Center is hoping, of course, that they will raise enough money to cover all the costs on this, but they're getting greater and greater every day than we had thought because of this extension and the federal government bringing in more lawyers and more expert witnesses and extending the time, and therefore the time my lawyers have to spend on it. So it's going to be an expensive proposition. And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, if the Justice Center has raised enough money, well, then that would be great. But if they haven't, and there's a difference between how much they raised and how much the total cost was, I have signed off that I will pay the difference. So that's where we are. So it's extremely important that if people are really interested in this and see this as important, that whether it's $1, whether it's a toonie, whatever it is, if they can contribute to the Justice Center. Some people have contributed to me directly, and I have sent it off to the Justice Center. Okay, every cent that's come to me directly, and it's amazing. I've had people turn up at the door.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, unbelievable. So there are very generous people out there, but also people who realize how important this is. Because if we could win this case, and we'll be one of the first cases going before this kind of court, and then this would have a magnificent, wonderful effect upon the rights and freedoms going forward and the democracy of our country, right? And very, very important. So thank you for raising it. And that's where it is right now. And it'll all be over by the 24th, 25th of September. And then the judge has to make a decision. And we're hopeful that the judge will make that, give us a Christmas present.
Okay.
Before Christmas.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we do encourage folks to participate and donate to that righteous cause. We are a nation in need of justice. And
exactly.
So thank you for yourself again, Brian, for taking this on in the way that you have. So folks, if you want to read the Magna Carta for Canada and you want to hear it delivered, you can visit Brian Peckford's blog and scroll down to May 29 and May 30. It's at peckford42.wordpress.com. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know we went past the time that we had allotted, but thank you very much for your generosity with your time. And God bless you and all you do.
And you're the first group in Canada to get the most recent update on my court case and a full explanation of those parts of the Magna Carta that I think were important to emphasize. So I'm pleased to have had this opportunity to do with you first. Later today, I will be doing with other groups across Canada, but on this one, you are first.
Well, very good. Thanks so much for that. God bless you. Have a great day and all the success in the various endeavors that you're undertaking. God bless you.
God bless you and all your viewers and listeners, and let's hope that we'll get that great Christmas present.
Super. Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Thank you, sir, very much. I appreciate it.